Thank you all so much for tuning in today. I'm really excited to dive into this office hours for us all to learn about building a burnout-resistant team and culture. Sounds like it's definitely something that's needed. So I'm glad that Marissa was able to offer this for us today. A core goal of Dreamers and Doers is to amplify you and your journeys, and intimate educational sessions like today's, filled with insights thanks to your fellow members, are the perfect opportunity for us to up-level together. So before we officially begin, I want to share a bit of background information on our esteemed expert. Marissa is the founder of Reloveution. I practiced that. I don't know if it came out right.
You're good. I'm putting the phonetic spelling in the chat, but yes, that's right.
Reloveution. I've been reading Reloveution for years, and this is the first time I think I've ever spoken it, so love it. Marissa is the founder of Reloveution, a consulting and professional development services provider that helps employers build strong, sustainable, and healthy workplaces with engaged employees, powerful leadership, and compassionate, heart-centered cultures. A globally recognized work culture transformation expert and facilitator, Marissa is driven by her own experiences of burnout and trauma in workplaces. She has worked with more than 100 companies and tens of thousands of current and emerging leaders worldwide to help them holistically and sustainably prevent what happened to her happening to their people. She is on a mission to transform the world of work through the power of compassion, community, and heart. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Marissa. We are so excited to learn from your expertise today. We know how valuable your time is, and we are so grateful to you for investing in Dreamers and Doers in this way.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And thank you all for being here. There was a moment between 1 o'clock and 1:01 where I wasn't sure anyone was going to show up. So I'm grateful to have a full house and to see all of your beautiful faces, and grateful that you are taking this moment to invest in yourselves and your teams and your organizations today. At the end, will share the materials in the chat, so you will have access to all of them. And I want you to feel comfortable asking questions as we go. Don't feel like you have to hold all of them to the end. Each of you is coming here for different reasons, from different contexts. Hannah shared with me some of the things you were hoping to take away, and I think we're going to be covering, at least tangentially, all of the things you're looking for. But if you're interested in digging deeper on any of this stuff, I'm here. This is what I do. I'm so thrilled to be here. I've definitely been a lurker in office hours for the last 3.5 years or so since I joined, and was pushed to actually do one. So I'm really excited to be here. Someone just asked, prefer cameras on or off? If you are in a place where you can have your camera on and your bandwidth is good, cameras on is great because I can see your faces and engage with them. But I understand that it's not always possible. And I talk to little black boxes all of the time, and I'm not as irked by it as I was in early 2020. We'll put it that way. So I am going to share my screen. And this is the first time I'm going to be using Canva to present, so we'll see, and hopefully it works out nicely. But just so all of you know, when I am looking, if you can see my face still, when I am looking over here, it's to look at your faces. I'm going to mostly be looking at the presentation, but I want to be able to see both the chat and your faces, and that'll be on this other screen. So hopefully we can be tolerant of that. So we are here today to talk about building a burnout-resistant team and culture. And you can notice right away that this is different than a lot of things about burnout, because it's not technically about preventing or healing from burnout for yourself. That's a workshop that I do facilitate and lead. But this topic is a little bit different in that we are looking at how to holistically and sustainably prevent, heal from, and create infrastructure to support people through burnout and sometimes compassion fatigue or chronic stress, or whatever you want to call it, on a culture level, on an organizational level. And this is something that we often miss the mark on in our organizations. So I'm really excited to dive in with you. So before we get there, who am I? So thank you for the introduction, Hannah. I'm Marissa, and I am the founder of Reloveution. That is love in the center of the revolution. And we believe that love has the power to transform almost anything. And for us, love is not this mushy gushy construct. Love requires high accountability, high expectations, deep compassion, and recognition of humanity and in the humanity of other people. And that's the foundation of everything that we do. So we do culture initiatives, we do leadership and management development, but all of that is grounded in our values of heart. And when I refer to heart, I might throughout today, it's an acronym, stands for humanity, empathy, authenticity, relationships, and trust. In my role, I wear a lot of hats. So you can see this. For those of you who follow me on LinkedIn, you will have seen this as a post. I wear lots of hats. I do lots of different things, but the core is about creating impact for humans, organizations, and the world. And the reason why this is important to me is because I worked for about 12 years within multiple toxic workplaces and with harmful leaders, and realized that a lot of these ecosystems that I was a part of, even though I really loved my work, they were hurting me. And remaining in these workplaces was a form of violence to myself. And there really didn't feel like there was an alternative for a really long time. In the year before I quit my job without a plan, I was in and out of the emergency room 3 separate times, all 3 times convinced I was dying because of chest pain so bad there was no way I was not having a heart attack. And all 3 of those times, the doctor said, there's nothing actually wrong with you. All of your tests are fine. Are you a little stressed out? Which is the most infuriating diagnosis in the world, because of course I'm stressed out. I am working at a nonprofit. I'm working 70 hours a week. I'm doing work that is changing the world, and it's so important. And I was stressed for a really long time, and my body just kept shutting down. I got to a point for myself in my burnout journey where the only thing that I could do, I no longer had the capacity to apply for jobs or figure out what came next. The only thing that I could do was remove myself from the system in order to figure out how to heal, rediscover who I was and who I wanted to be in the world. And I talk to people almost every week who has some version of this story of burnout that manifests in physical complications, sometimes really serious physical complications, and needing to take a prolonged break in order to be able to heal and move forward in any sort of constructive way. I ultimately decided I did not want to return to the system, so I started my company in the fall of 2019 with a mission of preventing what happened to me in workplaces from happening to other people, because this is not a unique story. It feels like it's a unique story, but it's not. And there are so many versions of it. And I want to make sure that we are building organizations and we are building teams that truly sustain human beings, which can be really hard when culture and society tells us that things need to be fast and things need to be urgent and there's so much to do and so little time. And I help organizations and leaders sort of reinvent that wheel. So that's where we are going today. Welcome to the couple people who tuned in after I started talking. Just want to note that I'm Marissa. I'm your adventure guide for today. And feel free to ask questions or interject comments in the chat. I am monitoring that. So let's get started. So for those of you who are here live in the room, based on what you know about burnout, on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being not at all burnt out and 10 being totally burnt out, how do you currently feel in this moment, Tuesday, January 10th, 2023? How are you currently feeling? You just give me a number. Got a 9, a 1, an 8, a 6, a 7. So pretty much all over the place. We've got a 3 and a 1, but just came off of an 11. Sophia, I want to hear from you about what brought you from an 11 to a 1. Tiffany says that even though she feels like a 7, she feels her team is a 10. That's real. We'll talk more about that. Tina, 8.5 to 10. Allison, 11 to a 1. So we've got some pretty big stress happening, and I just want you to give yourself permission to be here today and just take a really big deep breath. Activating our breathing can go a really long way in reducing our stress. It's not going to bring us from an 11 to a 1, but it might bring you to an 11 to a 10. And even that marginal difference helps us learn better. So just take a second. I'll do it with you. Let's just take a few really big deep breaths. And know that however you are coming into this space, I am so grateful that you are here, and it is okay. Whatever you are feeling is okay. Your feelings are your own, and hopefully we can help not only you, but also your teams. So let's talk about what burnout is. So when we talk about burnout, this has become sort of a buzzword over the last decade or so, and we're not very good at coming up with a very standard definition. You look up the definition and there are lots of different things that come up. This is actually a diagnosed syndrome that is specific to professional contexts. I disagree with that definition, so I'm part of the problem, because I think that burnout can be caused by family challenges and work and social challenges, and all of those things compound to exacerbate burnout. In this particular context, we're going to be talking about professional burnout, and that's mostly how it comes up, but I just want to name that there are those distinctions. So burnout is a profound and often debilitating physical or emotional exhaustion that professionals might experience as a result of chronic stress that has not been successfully managed or healed. So the first thing I want to say here is that stress is a normal human response to pressure, change, or threat. Research actually shows that stress can be a good thing. A healthy amount of stress helps us. It helps our teams. If stress becomes problematic when we do not take the time to manage it, when we do not take time to heal from it, when we ignore it for long periods of time, and it builds and builds and builds and builds. And when we do that, when we ignore it, when we don't heal, when we are not managing that stress, it generally manifests in 3 primary ways that have lots of sub-indicators that we will talk about. So it manifests in feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from your job, or increased negativity or cynicism at or about work, or reduced professional efficacy or productivity. What's important here is that you do not need all 3 of these things in order to be burnt out. Some people will lean real hard into number 1, and some people will notice number 3. This goes into this word might here. So professionals might experience. When we're talking about the factors that cause burnout, every person is different. And so when we manage a team, we need to figure out what causes burnout for our specific teammates and for ourselves and within our culture at large, because everybody's a little bit different and we all have different things that work for us to prevent burnout. We all have different warning signs and red flags. And so this is really important, right? We don't need to feel all of these things in order to be classified as burnt out. You might feel just one of them, and it might not happen at all, depending on who you are and where you are in your circumstances. So generally, the stages of burnout, so early burnout is the stress arousal. So we start feeling stressed out. These are normal physiological and psychological responses to persistent stress. These are things that you are all very accustomed to, I'm sure. So things like fatigue and irritability and anxiety and forgetfulness and negativity. On teams, you often start seeing gossiping and naysaying coming up when people wind up being more stressed out. People get more impatient, they're more cynical. And then there are these physiological symptoms like headaches and GI issues, which are a huge warning sign for me that I need to take a step back. If I start getting headaches or my tummy starts rumbling, that those are things that I need to pay attention to. I'm seeing 2 questions in the chat. They are big questions that I am going to hold off on until we get a little bit further, because I have big feelings about them and I don't want to get too off track too quickly. But I see them. Dejelis, is that Dejelis? How do I pronounce your name?
It's Dejali.
Dejali, totally wrong. Thank you. I will get it right the next time. Dejali and Allison, I see your questions. I am writing down how to pronounce your name so I don't actually mess it up. So this first category is this stress arousal. And then we move into the second phase of burnout, which is energy conservation, which sort of feels counterintuitive, but this is when our bodies and minds begin to compensate for stress with things like avoidance, withdrawal, or indifference. So this is, you start feeling really, really tired. You wind up being late to the meetings, even if it's just 2 minutes late. You're taking longer breaks. You're not feeling proud of your achievements anymore. You find it hard to start. You might start procrastinating. This is our body's way of saying, oh, there's stress happening. We need, like, this, something's going on. So avoid that activity, or don't go to this social gathering, or don't care, right? Caring requires energy. So, so that's our energy conservation stage. And then we move into this chronic exhaustion, which unfortunately is when we generally start paying attention and doing something. And in a lot of ways, it's already too late. So these are the physiological and psychological symptoms that become chronic and begin to feel unmanageable. So chronic sadness, even depression, social isolation, having nightmares or other somatic complaints, alienation, reduced performance, feelings of hopelessness, loss of control, loss of trust, heightened fear. These are things that start coming up in addition to all of those other symptoms at the other stages of burnout. If you take nothing else from today, I want you to take away the fact that we as a society can not only intervene with burnout once it gets to this chronic exhaustion phase. We as leaders, for our teammates and for ourselves, need to start noticing stress when it moves even an inch beyond healthy and address that then. And I'm going to tell you how to do that. That's why we're here today. But that is a really, really important point for today. So again, in the chat, I want you to write, what are the factors, conditions, people, or things that you feel cause or contribute to burnout for you, your team, or your organization? What causes burnout for you? Betty says misalignment. Stephanie says not caring about my work. That's big. Allison, terrible clients, unrealistic expectations, many demands, knowing there is no upward potential in the near term, being pulled in too many directions. Yes, we've got 2 of you saying the same words. Anything else you can think of? Things going wrong that are outside of my control. Thank you, Dejali. Yeah, all of these are really good reasons to feel burnt out. And it's really easy to name the things and much harder to do anything about them because, and going to one of our first questions is, do you think professional burnout culture is a byproduct of male-dominated patriarchal attitude? And in some ways, yes. Sometimes we, sorry, I lost my train of thought because I looked at something else. So when we are a part of our culture, we adapt to the culture, and workplaces were designed generally by men. And according to metrics related specifically to productivity. So when we think about the early working in the United States in particular, I actually don't know very much about other places, but in the United States, it was about how do we make the quickest possible and make the most money the quickest way possible, which is about creating machines out of people, which is not what we are. And burnout, even though we're just talking about it now in a really meaningful way, has always been the case. But there were a lot of other unhealthy mechanisms and coping mechanisms that came out before we started using the word burnout, which we'll talk more about. Tina added really difficult teammates and unrealistic expectations. That's all real. So if you are feeling burnt out by those things, I want you to know that it is okay to feel burnt out by those things. The question becomes, what do we do about it? There are, fortunately, some really core things that cause burnout. And I want you to think in your unique context about what is true in your context and for your people. So unreasonable time pressure, lack of communication and support from your manager or from other people, lack of role clarity, unmanageable workload, unfair, biased, or discriminatory treatment, bureaucracy and excessive red tape, lack of boundaries or work-life integration, repeated need to push against broken or harmful systems without seeing progress, unstable or ineffective management, lack of trust in teammates, leaders, or institution. So everything that you shared falls into one of these buckets, and it's real. These things are true in most American workplaces. What I want to call attention to is the fact that most of these things are outside of one person's control. So with the exception of lack of boundaries or work-life integration, all of these things can be addressed on a team or organizational level. And in fact, they need to be in order to create sustainable change. Because generally the individual contributor doesn't have an impact, doesn't have any control over the time pressure for their project. They don't have control over creating the systems or the red tape or the bureaucracy for how work gets done. And yet 90% of the burnout research that's out there is focused on individuals needing to heal from their own burnout, which is important, but it's not the thing that's actually going to push the needle in terms of preventing burnout more largely. So most of these things are outside of an individual's control, which is why we are here today. There are some common narratives that exacerbate burnout. And if you are brave enough, I invite you to put in the chat if you yourself fall into any of these narratives. And yes, some of these are more male-centric or might come from males more than from female identifying folks. But these are things that I hear all of the time. So when somebody starts feeling chronic stress or says that they're burnt out, they might hear messages of, this is your fault. Just do more self-care. You are such a saint for doing what you do. You must be so strong. It should be enough to know that you're helping people. The one that my dad says to me all of the time that makes me cringe every time is that negative thoughts are controllable and preventable. Yes, they are. That does not help me at all. When people say healing is your responsibility, or if you're burned out, you should just take better care of yourself, or just keep going, it'll get better, without right? It'll be better next week. It'll be better next month. It'll be better after this quarter is over. These are things exacerbate people's feelings of burnout rather than minimize it. So I see people saying really difficult, must be so strong. It should be enough to know that you're helping people. Just keep going. It will get better. These are real things. They happen. We hear these things all of the time. And one of the things we can do as leaders is start to draw attention to when we are using these things or using these narratives or falling into them for ourselves, because this is not what we want to happen. So we see this meme, there's a woman laying in a bed, covered in lavender. Somebody says, maybe a little lavender would help reduce your stress. And you're laying there in your bed covered and you're like, nope, definitely still stressed out, because those systems, those cultures, those things have not shifted around you. It doesn't matter how many bubble baths you take or how many massages you get. You're not going to be able to truly heal. So as a leader, this is not the message I want you to be conveying to your team, right? Like, just go get a massage. It'll all be better. Which brings us to, so what do we actually do? So there are 4 steps to building a burnout resistant team and culture, and a billion sub-steps. We are going to be focusing on number 4 today and giving you some really actionable strategies for the 3 things in blue. But before we get there, the first thing that we do, and this goes to another question that was in the chat, our first step is to recognize and affirm for ourselves and for our teammates that burnout is a workplace hazard. Just like a box in the middle of the floor or a piece of equipment, burnout is a workplace hazard and not just an individual experience. We have to pay attention to it. We can't ignore it or dismiss it when we see it happening. We can't blame people for it happening. If it's happening, it's destructive, and we need to do something about it. The question that was in the chat was about whether or not you should let your team know if you are burnt out. So you do not want to tell people that you are burnt out and then not do anything about it. If you share with folks that you are burnt out, it is because burnout is a workplace hazard. And this is something that we have, like, this has happened because of the conditions that we are a part of. And then you have to model what it looks like to actually do something about it. It is harmful for teammates to see people who say that they're burnt out and not do anything about it. It is helpful for people to know that somebody is burnt out and see them actually take action. So how do we make that happen? So step 2 is that we actually need to educate our team on what burnout really is and get to know individuals' unique warning signs and triggers. And this is just as important for you to know your team's triggers as it is important for them to know your triggers. So if you know that one particular client is super demanding, and one of your triggers in the workplace is when you receive an email from them, creating an accountability structure around having somebody else copied on that email, having somebody else respond to that email, having people say, hey, I saw that we got an email from this person. How are you doing? Just creating that community care goes a really long way. So I really believe when we're talking about burnout, that one of the most powerful things we can do is to create a system of community care and accountability to help people move through and recognize their burnout or their stress, rather than perpetuating this narrative that healing from burnout requires self-care. It requires both, but as leaders, community care, I think, is more important. Step 3 is that we need to actually measure and get feedback on how and why burnout is showing up for the people on your team and for your team in general. So we already saw, as you put in the chat, different people are burned out by different things. We need to identify the root causes in order to do anything about it. And those root causes might be different as our team changes or as our team grows. So we can actually measure this. We offer a burnout diagnostic tool where we can diagnose the percentage of people on your team that are low, medium, and high risk for burnout. And then we actually tell people why that burnout is showing up and what to do specifically. That's a part of our Beat Burnout program. So we want to make sure that we're measuring and actually knowing what's going on for our people, not for the people in the Googleverse. And then we want to create an action plan. So when we know what the problem is, it's not just we are going to eliminate burnout. It is we're going to eliminate the over demands on our time or excessive bureaucracy and too much red tape or whichever thing is causing it for your team. That's what we're creating an action plan around. And that action plan is to eliminate, prevent, or shift the factors or conditions that are causing burnout. What's in parentheses here is even if it feels impossible, that's really important, because all of this feels really hard. I know it feels really hard. And when you're the leader, you have a billion other things to do, and it's really hard to find the time to do this work. That's where I do a lot of work with companies. But even if it feels impossible, you have to do it, because otherwise there are going to be big ramifications down the line. So in terms of this action plan, when I'm advising people, there are 3 major buckets that we can do as specific actions to build a burnout-resistant team and culture. Before I get to these 4 things, I just want to pause and see if there are any questions up till this point.
This is a question/comment, but your point on people experience burnout in different ways is really helpful, because I'm very extroverted. I might want to have extra meetings with a team. I might want to see everybody, but that may, especially for the more introverted folks on the team, not to say that extroverts can't be burned out by the same things, but they might need to get their energy elsewhere, and then being around people or having to be on all the time might cause their burnout. And then so that was interesting as you were saying that, dawned on me. And then the other thing was that part of, we're doing a case study internally on why, totally internally, nobody will ever know about this other than my team, but why this particular client was the worst client we've ever had. And it just dawned on me that burnout, it's not just like the factors that compose the client, but what the effect on individual team members was as well. And one of my team members, every time she got an email from this particular person, she's told me many times it triggers her. So I didn't realize that trigger then led to, or was connected to, burnout.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, and sometimes we hear these things and we just think about, like, this is a workplace that you just have to do it, right? The client emails you, you just do it. That's your job. And when we can just create that moment of awareness of, this is adding extra stress. How can I either help manage that stress or help prevent that stress from occurring? That's where we start to get into really powerful mechanisms. I just need like less than a second to turn off my space heater because it was freezing and now it's not. Hold on 1 second. All right, and we are back. Other comments or questions at this point? All right, you just want the good stuff. All right, so we are going to get into these 4 things, which are going to be 5 different slides, just so you're aware. So this first thing is about reducing demands. So the first strategy is reduce demands, increase resources. For reducing demands, it can be really helpful for high energy or high stress jobs and responsibilities to put those things on rotation. So maybe in Q1, where one person is responsible for being the point person for this particular thing, or creating the social media, or creating or doing external events. And then the next quarter that rotates. It could rotate quarterly, it could rotate monthly, whatever works for you. But when you know on your team that there are things that cause a lot of stress, you don't want for one person to have that, hold that stress or that emotional responsibility at all times. So creating opportunities for those rotations can be really helpful. These next 2 are ones that people scream from the rooftops, but there's a caveat, right? So we want to encourage short breaks. We want people to be able to take a break from their day, take 15 minutes to go for a walk or to do stretching or whatever it is that the person needs in order to reset their brains. When we're working continuously, it actually signals danger to our brains and triggers that fight, flight, freeze mechanism for when we're actually in high stress environments. And so when we can take short breaks, either as a team or as individuals, it helps rewire our brains back to that place where we can be innovative and creative and do our work well. Encouraging short breaks during the workday is really important. We also, as leaders, want to require long breaks. So people must take vacation. This is really, really important. People must take their PTO. We need, as leaders, to encourage real weekends, vacations, and holidays, which means we are tolerant of the fact that there is no email or we're not going to respond unless there is an emergency. That's pretty straightforward. Most people can wrap their brains around that. But I want to draw your attention to this first exclamation point here. People taking time off is good, but it's not always the best or most sustainable solution. What they do in that time off matters a lot. Because if somebody goes on vacation and they spend the entire time stressing about work, even if they're not looking at their emails, if they're not doing things to replenish their hearts and their souls, they're going to come back at almost exactly the same level of stress the moment they open up their computer. So as leaders, when we're thinking about, okay, well, you have a vacation coming up, what are you going to do during your vacation to renew yourself, to reignite your passion, to take care of your health, right? And actually having those conversations without being too intrusive, but helping people recognize that what they do in their time off really matters. If you're just going to sit and binge Netflix, that might work for one person, but it might not work for another person. So we want to just be really conscious of that. So breaks are important. We also want to prioritize physical care on our teams. So this may be making sure that people are like going for walks or engaging in physical activity, and you're not mandatory, like not mandating that somebody does an hour of yoga a day, but maybe you start having one walking meeting a week, or you make sure at the beginning of every meeting to say, hey, have you eaten today? Or have you had water today? Do you have water close by? You need to stay hydrated. Making sure that we give people permission to take care of their physical health, which may be eating, staying hydrated, moving throughout the day, building that into our culture goes a really long way. The next way that we can reduce demands is by giving autonomy and flexibility. So I didn't actually see who was talking before, but like when you call a meeting, that might add an additional thing to somebody's plate versus reducing stress. We want to give people a sense of control whenever and wherever possible. So really think as a leader, do I need to have a say in this? And if so, that's great, articulate it. Where do these people, where do my staff, where does my team have autonomy and flexibility? And then give it to them. Because when people can decide when, where, how, and how often they are completing their jobs, as long as they are completing their jobs, we are helping them reduce that stress part of their brain. So giving autonomy is really helpful. It can also exacerbate burnout if you give too much autonomy. This is all a balancing game. I'm not going to say too much about that, but I just want to name it. We want to maximize clarity and minimize ambiguity. So when people feel that things are uncertain or ambiguous, or that a leader is not being transparent, that leads to our brain, again, signaling this is not safe. I don't know if there's a bear coming for me. I don't know what is happening. So even if you don't have all the answers, we want to be as clear as possible about what we do and do not know, and make sure that people have what they need in order to do their jobs, no matter how ambiguous their job may be. So that's really important. I want to just name that demands outside of work also add and compound stress and burnout. As a leader, it is hard not to feel like you have to take control over those things. I just invite you to consider if there are ways that you can reduce or support those demands and stressors. So childcare and elder care are really big ones these days. And there may be other things, but those are the things that are popping into my head right now. Just like, that's something to think about. It is not a requirement that you fix people's personal lives. And And then the other really important piece here is that demands are not only about workload. So we often think about it in terms of workload, but as leaders, we also have to pay attention to thought load and feeling load. How much does this person have to think while doing this task or working with this client or engaging in this project? And how much do they have to feel? Is this emotionally demanding? Because if it's super emotionally demanding and they're going from one emotionally demanding thing to another emotionally demanding thing, that becomes more demanding and our emotions wind up taking over, and that exacerbates burnout. So we can't just think about the amount of work. We have to think about what goes into that work as well. So that's reduced demands. We also want to increase resources as much as is possible in your context. I think thought and feeling load can actually be worse than workload if you're the leader. Yes, I think that is absolutely true. We actually have a learning series on the emotional labor of being a leader, and we talk a lot about that. So let's move into, or I'm falling a little behind on my time, so I just want to sort of rocket through so we have time for your questions. Increasing resources. So these are things that you're probably going to be aware of, but just bear with me. So building employee wellness programs, even if they are not giant employee wellness programs, they can go a long way. Providing access to professional help. Just having a document in your share drive that has mental health resources or places where people might turn to be able to support them in their specific times of need, so they don't have to ask for that help, can go a really long way. It's really helpful. Offering coaching, mentorship, professional development, creating peer support groups and affinity groups, creating space for team building and real retreat. So not strategic planning retreat, like retreat to just be together as human beings. Is really important. That helps replenish us and prepare us as a team for moving forward. As leaders, we want to provide regular and meaningful gratitude, appreciation, and rewards. The word regular and meaningful are really important there. Don't just do it because you have to. You can upskill people to have more resources. And then you can also consider volunteers to take on parts of the work that that maybe your folks do not have time for, and naming when that's the case is really important. So increasing resources, fairly straightforward. There are lots of different ways to do it. Please do not go and try to put all of these things into place. Talk to your team. Say, I went to this thing about building a burnout resistant team and culture, and we had these ideas. What are the things that feel most authentic to us and our culture? What would it make sense for us to spend a little bit of time building for our specific team? Or maybe it's just your leadership team, or maybe it's your full organization. Think about what resources your people really need, because it's not going to be all of these things. Allison says, my team primarily is comprised of performance coaches. Coaching is such emotional work, especially when a client is struggling. So I do my best to cap their sessions. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Allison. And I think that there's a part of coaching that is also about supervision. So is there a mechanism in place for when they have a super taxing call, or that they can say, I need to talk through this, or I can debrief this in this particular way. And doing stuff like that is helpful. I recently had a team member who didn't take us up on opportunities to access professional help. They did not ask for help when they were overwhelmed with work. They shut down rather than reach out. Are those team members a lost cause, or is there anything you recommend? It's a really, really good question. It is really hard when people do not take advantage of the things that you are giving them. But I would do, before considering them a lost cause, I would try to figure out what the barrier to entry is. So generally when people are not accessing support, it is for a very specific reason. So maybe it's because they don't want to pick up the phone to call the insurance company to see if they're their therapist is covered, right? I spent 3 hours on the phone with my health insurance yesterday and still don't have an answer about whether this person is covered. It's incredibly frustrating. That's a barrier of entry to me. I don't want to be on the phone. Maybe there's a shame or stigma about asking for help. Maybe there's a cultural dynamic. There's more peeling back of the layers of why this person is not asking or taking advantage of help. And we have to ask before saying there's nothing more that I can do for you. And if you want to talk more about that specific situation, I'm happy to do so. For now, I'm going to bump us along. So I just want you to think about how you might reduce demands or increase resources in your unique context. Scribble that down for yourself as we move on. According to the Mayo Clinic, the person you report to at work is more important for your health than your family doctor. And 58% of American workers trust strangers on the street more than their own boss. These two things tell you a lot about American society. It also makes this next point really important. So we need to shift our behaviors as leaders and managers, behaviors and mindsets, in order to be able to truly support people. I'm not going to go through all of these right now in the interest of time, but you will get all of them. I'm just going to share a couple that are really, really important and that leaders generally struggle with. So increasing your tolerance to the word no is a really big one. We don't like it when our staff say, no, I can't do that. But if you can create a culture where people feel safe saying, no, I do not have the capacity for that right now, and they can set and establish boundaries and it's safe to do so, it goes a really long way. But that means we need to release the sense of we have to say yes to everything. So as leaders, we need to increase our tolerance to the word no. We need to avoid "it's always been this way and I'm suffering" to narratives. So earlier I was talking about whether or not it's okay to share that I'm burnt out. Yes, but you shouldn't say when somebody comes to you and says that they're burnt out, I'm burnt out too, we just have to get through this. That may be entirely true, but that does exacerbate the sense of burnout. When we say things like it's always been this way and we rationalize it, it makes people feel hopeless and lost and like there's no way out. So we want to take that out as much as possible. We want to be realistic about the timing of projects and meetings. We want to help people enforce their own boundaries. And there are lots of different types of boundaries. And that's a resource I can share after the call, as well as a link to the types of boundaries that we have to set. And so when we know that somebody has a boundary, we're not going to let them cross it. So if evenings are for spending time with children, when you get an email during the evening hours, you're saying you broke your boundary last night. I don't want you to burn out. Please respect that boundary. I respect that boundary. We want to make sure that we're really, really good listeners and make sure that we are taking care of ourselves and asking for what we truly need every step of the way. There's a lot of other stuff here. Again, I am happy to be available offline if you have questions about what any of these things mean. But oftentimes we have to shift some things for ourselves and our mindsets to be able to prevent burnout for our team. I'm actually going to skip that, even though I really like it. And this last point is about shifting culture, policies, and systems. So we shift our mindset, or we shift our leadership practices, and then we need to do some of these things as well. So we need to increase clarity whenever possible. The more clear things are, the more safe people feel, the less burnt out people feel. We want to prioritize wellness and individual wellness in your specific culture. We not only want to become more tolerant to no for ourselves, but build systems and workflows that are tolerant to no. So in the client context, we want to create a common and streamlined message to use internally and externally when a no is required. So if a client is demanding too much, we want to create an expectation that it's okay to say no. A really, really big one for me is hiring the right people and firing the wrong people. These are in quotation marks because there are no like real right or wrong people, but we have to make sure we have the right people on our team. We need to make sure that everyone has goals, that they know what they're working towards. Again, flexibility and choice is really important. And then I think the last thing I'll share here is that building gratitude, appreciation, and celebration into your culture. That school shouldn't be there. Sorry, I was borrowing from another piece. Building it into your culture and into all of your processes and systems goes a really long way. And I want you to notice who and what gets celebrated and praised the most. And are you recognizing, and is your culture truly recognizing the behaviors you want recognized or repeated? I know I moved through that all really, really quickly. I saw Allison say, wow, but I don't know what it was too. So if you'd like to share more about that, Allison, that's great. What's the right approach for internal team competition, rivalry dynamics, and undermines the trust of a team? I keep hearing complaints. So this is going to totally depend on your particular workplace and culture. So there are some people like me for whom competition is wonderful. I am the most competitive person on the planet. I like a healthy dose of competition in my life. Generally in my adulthood, I've gotten better of like not comparing myself exclusively to other people. My partner is exactly the opposite. If you introduce an element of competition for him, he completely shuts down. So that's where your unique culture is going to manifest. And you want people to know that they are valued for them, no matter what. So you are valued for being you because you are amazing. Doesn't matter what Kathy's doing. It doesn't matter what Tom is doing. You're valuable unto yourself. And then if competition helps increase that value or deepen the value that people are bringing, that's great, but only if it works for those people. I think that where competition becomes really, really icky, from my opinion, and I know this is industry standard in a lot of places, law firms and sales are not the way I would do things. So people needing to be cutthroat in order to get the promotion, I think that's probably not the way we should be doing things. And like if a promotion is inherently based on two people competing against each other in terms of numbers, I think there are better ways of doing it. And so that type of competition I think can be really harmful. We've got 2 more minutes. What other questions are there or comments?
Do you have first of all, this is really helpful. Thank you so much. I know a lot
You're
of my
welcome.
random comments that I have, but do you have a format or a templatized survey that we should or either adapt or use as a jumping off point to ask our client, to ask our team, like what stresses you out or what are your triggers or those types of things, like an online survey or an in-person survey? Do you think it should be anonymous? Do you think it like what are some
so there are a bunch of things that I have that I want to make sure that you get, and I'm not going to be able to find all of them in the moment. So I think that what makes sense is if you would like for me to follow up with you specifically with the resources I'm about to share, just put your email address in the chat. I will scribble them down and download the chat before we leave and make sure that you get these things. So like I said, we have a burnout diagnostic, and we also have a trigger worksheet. So helping teams identify what are the triggers, your specific triggers. Oh my goodness, my computer is not cooperating here. We also have a setting boundaries and commitments template framework that we use to help establish relationships with direct reports that could be helpful. And Those are the three things that are coming to mind right now. So those are the three things that if for some reason you don't get something from me, those are the three things you can follow up with me about. My information is here. If you are interested in jumping on a call, totally free, just to talk more through these things, that link I just put in the chat, you can also feel free to email me. And again, the specific things that we do that are related to this topic are our Beat Burnout program, our Work Culture Jumpstart program, and we also provide VIP strategy sessions and coaching specifically to burnout and professional wellness. So I'm happy to hang back for a couple of minutes if there are other questions, but I just want to thank you so much for being here. Thank you for caring enough to be here, and let me know how I can help. I would love to be a part of your journey.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. I know that we could talk about this probably for many more hours. So thank you so much for, pouring into us and this topic. So helpful. And thank you everyone for showing up, asking such great questions. If anyone has any feedback to share about the session, feel free to fill out the form that I've just shared. But this was fantastic. Thank you so much, Marissa.
You are so welcome. Thank you all, and I hope to see you soon.